For part 2 of the update 9.1 refines, we're going to be covering legendary remixes for Micaiah and FEH. We also have a season refine going to Halloween Xane. Starting off with legendary Micaiah, she's a colorless infantry mage with the usual Micaiah stat spread. This ult was pretty lackluster on debut, so really we can only go up from here. First off, I just want to make a note that this Micaiah, I believe, was the first to get Maiden Soulless, replacing Sacrifice. It essentially is the same healing assist, but now it's got Harsh Command Plus's Penalty Cleanse. We don't have any attuned Micaiah type cleansing on this ult, so maybe a skill worth keeping. I do want to start with the new Dawn refine. This 14-byte tome is effective against armors and cavaliers and grants an extra +3 attack, very Micaiah-esque effect. If initiating or near an ally, Micaiah gets +6 attack and res and +5 speed and defense. She gains extra stats equal to 10% flat resistance and makes a free follow-up attack. Previously, Micaiah had Desperation 2 to use that follow-up. This has now been upgraded to any HP Desperation, so Micaiah can double tap immediately if not stopped. Good updates on the base weapon, Micaiah gets more stats and Desperation at any time. For the refine, Micaiah gets Slaying. If above 25% HP, she gets +5 to all stats, neutralizes attack and res debuffs, gets true damage equal to 20% res, and finally she has 50% DR piercing. Nothing fancy, but all very good upgrades. Slaying is always good, and partial DR piercing is appreciated on a do-effective weapon. My only issue is that Maiden Soulless can drop Micaiah's HP by the amount she heals. If you use that assist, you may not have enough HP for the refined part. Moving on to the remixed Prescience 2, this Beast used to inflict -5 attack and res and give 30% DR. As you can see, it's been massively buffed. Like the other Micaiahs, Legendary will also get Yune's buffing Chaos Madness. The enemies with the highest of each stat will take -7 to that stat, and it will spread to any nearby foes. For each of the highest statted enemies, they individually get debuffed with Sabotage and Panic as well. In addition, we have 4 more effects in combat. Micaiah inflicts -5 attack, speed and res. She now inflicts speed and res debuffs equal to the highest total penalties among the target and foes within 2 spaces. Her 30% DR now works on all attacks. Last, Micaiah has no guard. When it comes to Yune's debuffing, this is probably the scariest version if you cannot block or cleanse this effect. First off, those -7 debuffs get doubled via Sabotage. Second, if the foe has field buffs, Panic will turn those into negative buffs. Third, those panicked buffs now count as debuffs, meaning Sabotage also doubles them. Essentially, this Micaiah can really screw over buffing setups that don't have cleansing. Even if the unit themselves neutralizes debuffs in combat, Sabotage will leech from nearby enemies. This gets extra bad with the speed and res debuffs Micaiah adds. Similar to her attuned ult, this debuffed effect takes the highest total penalties on the unit and for nearby foes. Let's say the enemy gets hit by all -7 debuffs. The total is 28. This means Prescience 2 inflicts -28 speed and res on top of the regular debuffs and Sabotage. If panicked buffs are active, those also get added to the total penalty amount, meaning the enemy is extra screwed. For example, if the foe had full +6 field buffs that got panicked, that's another 24 total penalties. Add that to our previous 28, and Micaiah now inflicts -52 speed and res. Gotta include the base -5 as well. If you're familiar with attuned Micaiah, there's no attack debuffs this time, meaning this Micaiah is not going to be insanely bulky. However, legendary Micaiah gets speed debuffs. Combined with Desperation, she may not even need the free follow-up to be outspeeding fast enemies and double tapping them. This refine and remix is very much an offense-focused one. When it comes to builds, Micaiah gets times +4 as part of her remix. With Slaying and no guard, she can charge her higher cooldown specials on her first hit, and then proc them on her second Desperation hit. With times pulse, you can do this with 3 cooldown Luna or Flare. However, because Micaiah inflicts massive res debuffs, these specials may not be the best. Now, if Micaiah is getting attacked first, she would charge the specials for the counter. If you wanted though, Micaiah can also pre-charge 2 cooldown specials. She could double proc them, but it's only if Desperation didn't activate. Now, since Micaiah has effective damage, she's a fine user of Glimmer and Astra. Again, the res debuffs will also empower these specials. Some people have been using Astra-tuned Micaiahs to brute force nuke shield fighter units. If you really want to try this, Micaiah will need more cooldown. If you run Creation Pulse, Micaiah inflicts 2 statuses to get the -2 cooldown. With a Desperation double tap, she could in fact charge Astra in time. Now, this is a very simple offensive game plan, and it mainly hinges on Prescience debuffs not being cleansed and Micaiah getting Desperation. Freyr and others can block or cleanse debuffs, and then Artie Bearing as per usual screws Desperation. Thanks to Emblem Lyn and her Astral Storm style ring, you can set Micaiah up with Dual Strike or Triangle Attack Brave hits, plus a miracle support like Ymir. I was testing this with dual Micaiah and got good results, so I imagine this Micaiah ult will see similar things. Further skills you can run, Finish is fine, although I do think this Micaiah can opt for attack and speed variants instead of the usual attack and res. Again, due to Prescience speed debuffs, it is very possible this Micaiah is outspeeding naturally. She can use her free follow-up to cancel one follow-up denial, or you could maybe run the new perfect attack and speed to get no follow-up. This applies to other speed skills such as Flash Sparrow or Flashing Blade. Honestly, it's kinda wild that any Micaiah would be running these skills, but that's what this remix is trying to enable. If you did want another playstyle, you could run Pulse of Ploy and then flat res boosting skills. Micaiah already inflicts stat debuffs, so you can still get the Ploy and Exposure statuses. She also gets free cooldown every turn. If you can stall and match, Micaiah can maybe just pre-charge Astra, AoE specials, or heck even Miracle itself. If you only really plan to use Micaiah to initiate once per turn, then it's basically just better than regular times Pulse. Overall, this is actually a really solid update for one of the least impressive legendaries to debut. Micaiah gets her usual debuffing chaos, and she can potentially stack enormous amounts of speed and res debuffs. If you try to tank this Micaiah with a speedy unit, you really need to be careful. It might not be the free follow-up that is allowing her to double. Our next refiner remix is for legendary Faye. She's a bulky blue infantry dragon, and Faye's whole gimmick is her pre-charged miracle special. With the remix, Life Unending 2 still self-charges immediately and is a 5 cooldown miracle. New effect though, Faye now gets 40% damage reduction for first attacks, and her next counterattack reflects back the damage she reduced. If the miracle effect triggered, Faye will heal 99 HP just like a raid boss. With the remix, she now neutralizes deep wounds while this happens, and the full heal now goes on a 2-turn cooldown instead of only happening once per map. If you can survive in between turns, Faye can now full heal multiple times. She is tougher to take out with the unpierceable 40% DR, but this is a one-time activation only. With the reflected damage counterattack, Faye could also surprise foes if Miracle does kick in. Generally speaking, the main issue with this special is that it's still a 5 cooldown one, which it requires a lot of cooldown to recharge. Additionally, even if you can recharge in between fights, Faye needs to heal some HP. No problem with the full heal, but if you want to do this in back-to-back fights or just back-to-back turns, then you're gonna need to watch out. Moving on to the Dazzling Breath Refine, this is a 6-to-1 weapon with +3 attack. New effect is that foes within 3 rows or 3 columns now take -5 to all stats, and then their field buffs get neutralized. For Faye's combat, if the foe initiates or has high HP, she inflicts -5 stats again. She has 1 follow-up denial, and she has true damage equal to 20% res, and inflicts good old guard. Besides extra true damage, Faye now offers some Omni-Low support from long range, simple but nice to have. She should benefit from the effect as well. For the Refine, Faye gets Bulwark's Super Obstruct if within 3 spaces of an ally. Faye also inflicts a third set of -5 debuffs. She gets flat DR equal to 20% res, and inflicts Scal on the foe. Fairly simple Refine, legendary Faye increases her tanking power and adds some annoying supportive effects. Faye now inflicts -15 to all stats, and with Bulwark, she can hold the front line while having her Miracle Special and full heal. Scal, Guard, and Fall Down are all fine, though counterable effects. Generally speaking, Faye's not doing anything super fancy we haven't seen before. She might be able to pull off the Miracle into reflected counter playstyle like Nyx, but Faye is pretty bulky, meaning she's going to be taking less damage, and which means less reflected damage. You could also run a very offensive build, but I do think the intention of this unit is to just be annoyingly tanky with the Miracle and full heal as another deterrent. For builds, Faye gets Dragon Scales as part of her remix. Very recent skill from last Halloween, this is basically an upgraded Dragon's Ire. You get a free follow-up attack and 50% DR piercing. This gives Faye some damage potential. This skill does a defense or res stat check at start of combat. If Faye has higher defense or res, she inflicts attack, defense, and res debuffs based on the difference up to -11. That's quite a lot. Finally, this skill gives -1 cooldown before the foe attacks, mini Lagu's friend, sort of. Since Life Unending self-charges on turn 1, it means Dragon Scales cooldown is only going to be helpful for recharging, or if the foe has some kind of post-smoke or post-tie effect. Assuming Faye survives a fight and full heals, she's still going to need 4 more cooldown if you're starting another battle. Even if she can take some hits, I would still consider running cooldown skills like Warding Breath, Defensive Rise Pledge, or a Temple No Guard effect would be nice too. If you go with Lagu's friend, Faye can get -2 cooldown. Unless you're running Emblem Marth, the cooldown timings may still be kinda awkward even with Breath type cooldown. Basically, if you want a Chain Miracle, you're gonna need some extra type of cooldown. One benefit of Dragon Scales is the follow-up could help recharge. Meanwhile, Lagu's friend can give Faye 40% rise as true damage and flat DR, potentially better than the stat debuffs, although damage-wise, Faye only gets the full DR piercing after Life Unending triggers. Without that free follow-up, it's possible she may not even get to counter after, so yeah, Lagu's friend may not be a strictly better option. Cooldown skills aside, Faye can run a bunch of other things. Finish will be active immediately, so free healing to stall would be good with Dragon Scales. You can run Unity or Scout A skills, plus Faye can also run even res Wave D for a third Scout effect. Multiple Scals really isn't that insane of a game plan. For distant counter skills, Faye has distant stance, which is fine. You could run distant bonus doubler or the sacred seal as well. For C skills, Barricade's a pretty funny one because now Faye can have Bulwark and Warp Bubble. Content Control is another anti-movement ability. Barricade's strong though, since it's another drive buff for allies and it negates defensive res stat penalties. Very good for a tank. If you want to heal, Breath of Life 4 is an obvious option. For extra support, Faye could run Ploys. Maybe you want to use Stronghold or Fortifications. The Fortifications plus Dragon Scales would be kind of fun for mixed phasing. Faye might get the double when initiating, and she can get distant counter plus the stone terrain for the enemy phase. Overall, Legendary Faye is still that raid boss chicken with multiple HP bars. She has more innate tankiness to stall, and Bulwark can block movement to let Faye's teams advance. She also has that Omni Low support from long range now. You could play into more support skills if you want. When it comes to chaining life unending, the Refiner remix do not really help with that. 5 cooldown is a lot, even with Lagu's Friend or Dragon Scale's instant cooldown before getting hit. If you want a fellow annoying frontline Miracle Dragon, Faye can team up with the Dual Leers. Their Divinely Inspiring status gives -2 cooldown before getting hit. Suddenly, Miracle Chaining may be a lot easier, plus now you got 2 miraculous units on the field. The last refine for this month we're talking about is for Halloween Xane. With 2 refines and whatever the heck Ronin got, I wouldn't call Xane's refine super busted by any means. However, Xane is an extremely funny unit, and one of the most unique in our 1000 plus cast of heroes. He's a 4-star focused colorless infantry mage, and the only stat you need to pay attention to is his base 47 HP. Xane's Joker's Wild is an amazing fun weapon, and while it sort of is a meme, this refine does give Xane some proper combative tools. This 14 Might Tome grants another 5 HP. It now gives Xane Close Counter. If within 3 spaces of an ally, Xane gets +5 to all stats, and true damage equal to 20% speed. The original effect of the weapon got a description change, but unless I'm missing something, it functions the same as before. Basically, Xane is a shapeshifter, and as such, he takes on the highest stats of allies within 3 spaces. This is calculated independently, and Xane always takes on the highest stat, even if it's lower than his base stats. This means he can actually lose stats. Overall, Joker's Wild got upgraded to 3 space range to activate, which is great. The true damage is nice, and Xane gets another 5 as stats in combat. He also gets Close Counter, which is pretty hilarious. I totally didn't give my own Xane CC, couldn't be me. Now, if you're still confused on how this weapon works, let's say Xane is near Brave Alphonse. Our Asker Lord can hit some insane flat stats thanks to his great talent mechanic. Let's say Alphonse has 70 defense. If Xane goes into battle, he gains +45 defense to match Alphonse's flat stat. You now do this for all other stats except HP. You really want to pair Xane up with some high flat statted allies. The stronger they are, the stronger Xane becomes, and it's amazing. Now, for the refine, at start of either phase, Xane grants +6 field buffs to all stats, Hexblade, and No Panic to allies within 3 spaces for 1 turn. If Xane is within 3 spaces of an ally, he gets another 5 stats. He gets flat DR equal to the greater of 20% defense or res for first attacks, and then since he's a dragon, Xane actually also inflicts Scowl. First off, since his own stats don't matter, Xane doesn't buff himself. Hexblade would have been nice to have, but I guess they wanted to incorporate his default infantry Hexblade. Now, a unit who can give full +6 buffs within 3 spaces is pretty insane. Xane's going to get those stats back in combat. Speaking of which, this weapon now gives +10 to all stats, true damage, and flat DR. Just like Lagu's Friend, Xane takes the higher of defense or res since his stats would depend on your team. Depending on your team, Xane can have high attack, speed, defense, and res. You will need to run a res check for Scowl, so do keep that in mind. When it comes to builds, Joker's Wild is a more defensive weapon in nature. Xane can't run defensive specials, and percent DR skills are a little tough to come by. For a mage who can potentially get a ton of defensive res and gets flat DR from those stats, Lagu's Friend seems like the best option. 40% defense or res turned into flat DR, and then a second true damage source to stack with the speed scaling part from the rear weapon. With no slang, Xane can run this with Flare. Max percent HP healing is great for a mage who actually has high base HP. Now, if you want to get Emblem Ike's percent DR, you're going to need times pulse or -1 cooldown in some way. Xane could also get more damage from something like an Ignis or Glacies, but that's going to require even more cooldown. Now, assuming Xane can borrow high speed, no follow-up is a solid perk to have on any build. You can use this with Finish 4 for healing and some extra true damage. Generally speaking, Xane can run a ton of various things depending on what you want, plus your supports. For example, he's a really good user of the new fodder from Attuned Brigid. The new perfect attack and speed gives no follow-up from the A slot. Tempo Echo gives 50% DR piercing, and Xane can combo Tempo with Scowling Guard to deter specials. No Guard can also help him charge his own specials. Since he has high base HP, you can run skills like Imagery Pulse 4 or maybe even Panic Ploy. For A skills, Unity could be fun to help turn around debuffs, or you could use boost skills for more HP and guard. In the B slot, No Follow Up and Tempo 4 are both fine. Resonance is another DR piercing source and true damage option. For C skills, Infantry No Follow 4 can help supply another buff to your team and give warping. Breath of Life 4 can be great, plus Xane can borrow high defense from an ally. You can also use Panic Smoke to mess with the enemy's field buffs. Now, if you want percent DR skills, Xane could use Remote A skills, Guard 4, LC Jessup 4, or perhaps Brash Assault 4. Guard Echo is another option too. For cooldown, Xane can run Time's Pulse, its Echo version, Creation Pulse, or even Special Spiral. Flash Sparrow and Pledge C skills also work. For more support skills, Constant Control would be annoying, and then maybe you can run something like Obstruct. Attuned Hector's Bulwark status would be kind of fun, and in general, part of Xane's appeal is that he's a close kind of range unit who potentially has high attack, speed, defense, and res all at once. You can't just expect to snipe him out, and he might be packing more damage than expected. When it comes to teammates, Brave Alphonse is incredible because of great talent, and he runs fortifications for the flat defense and res. His attack is also pretty high naturally, which means you just need to find a high speed unit to back Xane up. Speed Taker can stack speed, but you may want something like a double life and death class cannon. Now, because Xane can borrow stats and his starting defense isn't that high, he potentially is a funny unit to bring against Marauder. He takes on Assigned Decoy, but then in comes a unit who might be borrowing 60, 70 plus defense and res. Funny little side effect of Joker's WoW's incredibly unique mechanic. Overall, I do not see Xane being a huge problem or anything. However, he's just a funny little guy. You can get a ton of free stats while also having close counter and scowl. Similar to when he first released, he's just so unique that he's fun to mess around with, and being a 4-star focus unit, you might be able to snag a copy without spending too many orbs. If you want a cheap build, you could just run something like No Fall of 3, and then a free Panic Smoke 4 is in the Ephemera shop this month. Just keep in mind, while stat stacking is fun, and at its core, FEH is a numbers game, you really need other effects and abilities to compete. Those are going to come from premium skills and supports. That's going to be it for part 2 of the 9.1 refines. I would say Legendary Micaiah requires a bit more respect now for sure. If you can't cleanse debuffs, you may not want to let her initiate first. Now, if you missed part 1, we went over Sonya, Lex, Selena, and Ronin. If you haven't heard, Ronin got a ton of new fun skills. Next up, we're going to be covering the first new Heroes banner of 2025. That will be coming shortly. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.